Joseph and Mary's flight to Egypt is one of the most fascinating stories in the Gospels. Right after the Magi's visit, King Herod sent soldiers to kill Jesus, but an angel warned Joseph to flee. So he took Jesus and Mary and fled in the night to Egypt, and they lived there until Herod's death. But how did they get to Egypt? Where did they live? And what does this story tell us about Jesus? The Magi had come to Judea seeking the newborn king of the Jews. Herod, who called himself king of the Jews, ordered the Magi to return with the child's location once they had found him. But after they visited Jesus, the Magi were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they departed to their own country by another way. Right after they left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." So, that very night, Joseph rose and took the child and his mother and departed to Egypt. But how could one get from Judea to Egypt? There were three possibilities. The first way was by ship along the Mediterranean coast. The nearby ports of Gaza, Ashkelon, and especially Joppa were highly active in the first century. Cargo ships carried local goods like olive oil, wine, and balsam out to locations across the Mediterranean, including Egypt, and passengers could usually pay for passage on board. The fare to Egypt was likely a couple weeks' wages, affordable for Joseph and Mary given their recent enrichment from the Magi's gifts. And under the right conditions, the journey might have taken just a few days, much quicker and more pleasant than trekking hundreds of miles across the desert. Yet, despite these factors, it is highly unlikely Joseph and Mary sailed to Egypt. First, between November and March, nearly all maritime activity in the Mediterranean ceased due to violent storms and dangerous weather. If Joseph and Mary fled from Judea in the fall or winter, sailing would not even have been an option. Second, even during the right season, sailing departure times were fickle as ships waited for cargo loads in good weather. For a couple seeking to quickly escape, waiting around at a Herodian port was very unwise. But above all this, one critical fact almost guarantees they did not travel by ship. Joseph and Mary belonged to an Israelite culture that was strongly agricultural and land-based and very wary of the sea, which the Hebrew scriptures depicted as a place of chaos and monsters. In fact, one of the scripture's only sea journeys ended in near disaster when the prophet Jonah departed from Joppa, but was caught in a storm, thrown overboard, and swallowed by a great fish. Indeed, it is quite possible that neither Joseph nor Mary had ever even seen the ocean before. So we can be mostly certain that, in their flight from Herod, they would not have sailed to Egypt. But the second option from Bethlehem to Egypt is much more likely: the Way of Shur, an ancient inland road connecting Egypt with the Levant. From the southern foothills of the Judean hill country, it descended south from Hebron into the Negev, passed through Beersheba, then went on to the wilderness of Zin and the Nabatean caravan outpost of Nisana. From there, the road ran west across the desert through the wilderness of Shur before reaching the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. The Way of Shur would have provided a compelling path of escape for Joseph and Mary. It was an ancient path with a strong biblical history, used by Hagar and Abraham, and later the Israelites during the Exodus. It also provided the fastest way out of the Herodian kingdom. Given the urgency of the angel's warning and their immediate departure in the night, Joseph might have prioritized getting away from Herod's domain as quickly as possible. Finally, compared to the heavily trafficked coastal region, this path would have allowed for much greater secrecy. But taking the Way of Shur to Egypt would not have been easy. Most of the route, especially past Beersheba, traversed harsh wilderness almost completely devoid of water or human life, with the exception of a couple way stations. The distance between wells in some places was 2 to 3 days, and with a young baby, a feeding mother, and so little margin for error, a wrong turn or a missed well could be fatal. Since they left with no preparation, Joseph and Mary would have needed to stock up heavily along the way before entering the desert, something they may not have had the time nor foresight to do. Indeed, given that Joseph and Mary had likely never been to Egypt before, it would have been very risky to take a wilderness back road with few caravans to join or fellow travelers to give information. Moreover, this remote desert route far from Roman law enforcement was ripe for bandits, which put them at great danger of robbers, especially given the costly gifts they carried. So, although the Way of Shur offered some advantages, it also carried significant drawbacks. But the same cannot be said for the third and most likely option from Bethlehem to Egypt, the coastal road known at that time as the Way of the Sea. From Bethlehem, Joseph and Mary would have descended southwest through the Judean foothills onto the coastal plain at Ashkelon, then followed the road southwest, leaving the Herodian kingdom and stopping at the well-known road towns of Gaza, Raphia, Rhinocorura, and finally the Egyptian border fortress of Pelusium. The Way of the Sea was not free of trouble. Compared to the inland Way of Shur, it carried a greater risk of questioning at Herodian and Roman checkpoints, and customs taxes on their gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But this coastal road was still the most favorable option for Joseph and Mary. The multitude of towns and way stations it passed through would have compensated for their lack of preparation, and the large number of travelers would have provided cover, safety, and information. Also, compared to the Way of Shur, this path was quicker and more pleasant since it stayed on flat coastal road that was cooled by sea breezes. It's no wonder that many Judeans referred to it as simply the road to Egypt, since it was so commonly used for Egyptian travel. So, as the Magi detoured around Jerusalem, and as Herod's men slaughtered all the male children who were 2 years old or under in the area of Bethlehem, Joseph and Mary fled southwest, in a journey that would have taken 2 to 3 weeks across nearly 200 miles of arid steppe and desert before they reached the Egyptian border. But once they arrived in Egypt, where exactly did Joseph and Mary live? The Bible gives no indication, but we can make a strong guess. Egypt in the first century was no backwater Roman province, but one of the most densely populated and strategic places in the entire world. An ancient home of civilizations centered on the rich soils of the Nile Delta. Caesar Augustus had won it for Rome a few decades earlier, and it quickly became the breadbasket of the empire, supplying the million-resident capital of Rome with as much as 1/3 of its annual grain supply. Egypt itself had somewhere between 4 and 8 million people spread across 12,000 square miles of cities and irrigated farmland, and among that population were several 100,000 Jews. Indeed, Egypt had long served as an asylum destination for endangered Jews. Abraham, Jacob with his sons, Jeroboam, and the Jerusalem exiles with Jeremiah had all fled to Egypt to escape environmental or political crises. Upon arriving in Egypt, a refugee family like Joseph, Mary, and Jesus would have searched for a Jewish community that offered quick integration. Although Egypt contained many such communities, there are 2 that rise to the surface as primary candidates for their settlement. The first is the ancient metropolis of Alexandria. Alexandria was not only Egypt's capital, but a world leader in scholarship and commerce, and the 3rd most populated city on Earth. Its library, the Library of Alexandria, was the largest and most prestigious collection of manuscripts in the ancient world, with more than 500,000 scrolls, and the city attracted great philosophers like Philo, who would have been living there at the same time as Joseph and Mary. Alexandria was also a major commercial hub for both the bounties of Egypt and the Indian spice trade. Lying at the mouth of the Nile River, its lighthouse was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and would have filled any sailor with awe and wonder. Alexandria was especially important for the Jewish people. It was by far the largest Jewish city in the world in the late 1st century, with well over 100,000 Jews, comprising about 1/3 of its population. And 2 centuries earlier, Alexandria had birthed one of the most important events in textual history, when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, a version known as the Septuagint that quickly became the primary biblical text used across the world. It's clear why Joseph and Mary would have gone here. If there was one place in Egypt known for Jewish community in the late 1st century, it was Alexandria, and Joseph had probably met Jews from Alexandria during his regular pilgrimages to Jerusalem. The semi-autonomous Jewish district within the city would have allowed them to integrate quickly with housing, a local synagogue, and a job for Joseph. But it's worth considering why Alexandria wasn't inevitable. First, it was on the far side of the Nile Delta, so even after making it 200 miles to the Egyptian border, they would have faced nearly the same distance again, with weeks more of supplies just to get there. The angel had warned Joseph to remain in Egypt until I tell you. If Joseph expected the stay to be short, he may not have felt the need to trudge across the entire province. Second, although the Alexandrian Jewish community was massive, it was deeply Hellenized in its language, customs, and thought, which would have been culturally jarring to Joseph and Mary. Alexandria was founded by and named for the pioneer of the Hellenistic age, Alexander the Great, and it was filled with Greek-style gymnasiums, theaters, and public spaces. Even in Jewish quarters, synagogue life operated exclusively in Greek, and the God of Israel was melded with Platonic philosophy in the midst of an urban, cosmopolitan setting. For a young couple who spoke Aramaic and hailed from the rural and conservative Galilee, Alexandria was a world apart, so it's somewhat hard to imagine them seeking refuge there. But what other place in Egypt would they have chosen? There were many pockets of Jewish communities throughout the province, spreading across the delta and all the way up the river into Middle and Upper Egypt. Yet one community, more than any other, stands out as a captivating draw: the Land of Onias. The Land of Onias was a major Jewish enclave and worship center in the 1st century, most famous for its temple, the Temple of Onias, the only Jewish sacrificial temple in the world outside of Jerusalem. 170 years earlier, a man named Onias III had been high priest in Jerusalem, which was ruled by the Seleucid Empire. Onias' brother, Jason, stole the priesthood from him by offering a bribe to the Seleucid king in Antioch. After the king appointed Jason as high priest, Onias went to Antioch to appeal the decision, but was assassinated while he was there. Following the assassination, his son, Onias IV, fled to Egypt and convinced the Ptolemaic king in Alexandria to sponsor a rival Jewish temple to the one in Jerusalem. The Temple of Onias was soon built in the southeastern Nile Delta, and although smaller and poorer than the Jerusalem temple, it was still a formidable rival. Its design imitated the Jerusalem temple, it had its own altar and animal sacrifices, and it was operated by legitimate priests from the tribe of Levi and the line of Zadok. In fact, by the 1st century, a significant Jewish presence had grown in the area surrounding the temple, many of whom had come as refugees from the Seleucid and Herodian persecutions in Judea. Since Joseph and Mary were Torah-observant Jews who had recently dedicated Jesus at the Jerusalem temple, they likely would have been suspicious of the rival Onias temple, which violated the Torah's prohibition on other sacrificial centers outside Jerusalem. Nonetheless, without participating in the temple itself, they still could have integrated into the surrounding Jewish community with its kosher food, Sabbath observance, and regular festivals. Indeed, compared to Alexandria, the Land of Onias, with its Jewish rhythms and wheat and barley fields, was much more culturally proximate to the Galilee, and it was the closest major Jewish settlement from the Egyptian border, half the distance of Alexandria, at just 100 miles away. Moreover, its temple had arisen out of circumstances just like Joseph and Mary's, built by another family who fled persecution in Judea and found refuge in Egypt. Yet beyond all these factors, if the Holy Family lived in this area of Egypt, it would have touched something very deep and very old in the story of Israel. Long before Onias, another family had also fled a crisis in the land of Israel and found refuge in Egypt: the patriarch Jacob and his 12 sons. They arrived through the saving acts of one of their brothers, Joseph, who received many dreams from God, and through these dreams and his move to Egypt, saved not only his family but all the earth, who came to buy his grain during a long famine. When the Holy Family likewise went down to Egypt, they were led by another Joseph, whose father was also named Jacob. This Joseph too was a dreamer who left the land of Israel in the midst of a crisis, and through his dreams and his move to Egypt, saved not only his family but all the earth, with a salvation far greater than grain. This Joseph was carrying the bread of life himself. Yet there are deeper layers still. Many generations later, after Jacob and his sons had died, the people of Israel, Joseph and Mary's ancestors, were living in Egypt in the land of Goshen, which Pharaoh had allotted to them. This land was in the same region as the Land of Onias. In what came to be known as the Exodus, God delivered them out of the land of Goshen and into the land of Israel, a moment God later spoke of like this: "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." Just like Israel, Jesus lived in Egypt. And when Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." So he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. According to Matthew, Jesus wasn't just returning home. He was fulfilling Israel's Exodus story, as God once again declared, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Israel was being redefined around the person of Jesus. Just as Israel was God's son, Jesus is God's son. Yet Jesus is not only God's son, but the new Moses who leads his people out of exile. Moses, like Jesus, was born under a wicked ruler and saved from a massacre of baby boys. When his life was under threat, he too fled to another country, and later on the Lord appeared to him, and with the very words spoken to bring back Jesus, told Moses to go back, for those who sought your life are dead. So, just as Moses returned to Egypt to accomplish a great work of deliverance, Jesus also returned himself to the land of Israel to accomplish an even greater work of deliverance, to save his people from their sins.